The cafe smelled of burnt coffee and wet coats, the kind of place people passed through without noticing, but for me it felt like a courtroom where my entire life was about to be judged. I arrived early as always, choosing the table near the window so I could watch the street and prepare myself for her arrival. My son slept against my chest, his small weight both comforting and terrifying, as if one wrong move could wake him and expose how fragile I really was. I adjusted his blanket again and again, not because he needed it, but because my hands needed something to do. Every few seconds I checked the door, my heart jumping at every sound, hoping and fearing it would be her. When she finally walked in, time slowed in a cruel, deliberate way. She looked almost the same, confident posture, calm face, but there was a distance in her eyes that hadn't been there when we were married. She scanned the room, spotted me, and hesitated for just a moment before walking over. That pause hurt more than anger ever could. She sat down across from me, placing her bag neatly beside her chair, as if this meeting were just another task to complete before moving on with her day. "You said it was important," she said, her tone polite but guarded. I swallowed hard, suddenly unsure where to begin. I looked down at our son, his eyelashes resting softly on his cheeks, unaware that his entire world was hanging by a thread. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "He's grown," I said, immediately regretting how small the words sounded. She nodded, her eyes lingering on him for a second too long, and I saw something flicker there, love, guilt, maybe both. The silence stretched, pressing against my chest until breathing felt difficult. I had practiced this moment 100 times in my head, but now every prepared sentence vanished. What remained was desperation, raw and unfiltered. "I wouldn't have asked if there were any other way," I finally said, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "I know I don't have the right anymore." Her eyebrows tightened slightly, a familiar sign that she was bracing herself. My hands trembled as I continued, Just pretend you still love me." The words tasted bitter the moment they left my mouth. I rushed on before she could stop me. "Not forever. Not even for me. Just for a little while. For him." I shifted our son slightly so she could see his face more clearly, hoping his innocence might say what I couldn't. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, and for a moment I thought she might stand up and leave without saying anything. Her jaw tightened, and when she spoke, her voice was controlled but cold. "You're asking me to lie," she said. To myself, to him, to you. I tried to respond, but no sound came out. She glanced around the cafe, lowering her voice. "We already tried pretending once, remember? We pretended everything was fine until it wasn't." Her words weren't loud, but they echoed painfully inside me. "I know," I whispered. "No," I whispered. "I know I failed you." My throat burned, and I hated myself for how weak I sounded. But I'm trying to do better. Every day. I just don't want him growing up thinking his mother didn't want him. At that, she looked back at our son again, and her expression softened just enough to give me hope. It was dangerous hope, the kind that hurts the most when it dies. She reached out as if to touch his hand, then stopped herself, pulling back slowly. When she finally spoke again, her voice was lower, almost tired. "This isn't about him not being wanted," she said. "It's about us being broken." She stood up, adjusting her coat, already preparing to leave. I felt panic rise in my chest, the urge to grab her hand, to stop her, to say anything that would keep her there. But I stayed still, holding our son, watching the woman I once loved create even more distance between us. As she turned away, I realized that asking her to pretend wasn't just about love. It was about my fear of facing the truth. Alone, she stopped just outside the cafe, the glass door swinging, shut behind her with a soft thud that felt louder than it should have. I watched her through the window for a second, afraid that if I stood up too quickly, I might lose whatever chance still existed between us. My son stirred slightly in my arms, letting out a small sound, and that was enough to push me forward. I gathered myself and followed her outside, the cold air hitting my face like a wake-up call. The street was busy, people passing by with places to go, lives intact, while mine felt like it was unraveling in public. "Wait," I called out, my voice cracking despite my effort to sound steady. She turned around slowly, irritation flashing across her face before she masked it with control. Rain had begun to fall, light but persistent, dotting her coat and dampening her hair. I stepped closer, not caring anymore who might see us. "Please," I said. Just listen for one more minute. She exhaled sharply, clearly torn between walking away and staying. Finally, she nodded once, more out of exhaustion than agreement. He asked about you every night, I said, the words spilling out now that I'd started. Sometimes he points at the door and says your name like he expects you to walk in. My grip tightened slightly as I held him, afraid the truth might spill onto the pavement if I loosened it. I tell him you're busy. I tell him you love him. I don't know how long I can keep lying like that. Her eyes dropped to the ground, and for a moment she said nothing. I could see the conflict in her face, the war between guilt and self-protection. She looked up suddenly, anger rising to cover the hurt. And what about me? She snapped. Do you know how many nights I waited for you to come home before midnight? How many dinners went cold? Her words came faster now, years of resentment finally escaping. You were always working, always promising things would get better. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but she raised a hand, stopping me. I left because I felt invisible, she said quietly. I couldn't keep pretending either. The rain grew heavier, soaking through my sleeves, but I barely noticed. I worked because I was scared, I admitted, my voice low. Scared of failing you. Scared of failing him. I gestured slightly to our son. I thought if I just held everything together financially, the rest would somehow fix itself. My chest tightened as I spoke the truth out loud. I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. The words hung between us, fragile and exposed. She closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing herself. When she opened them, there were tears, but her expression was firm. Love isn't enough if it keeps breaking us, she said. Her voice softened, but the finality remained. She reached out, gently adjusted the edge of our son's blanket, then pulled her hand back. I'm sorry, she whispered, whether to him or to me, I didn't know. Then she turned away, heels clicking against the wet pavement, each step sounding like a door closing behind her. I stood there in the rain, holding my son, realizing that some goodbyes don't come with shouting, just the quiet. Understanding that something precious has already slipped away, stood there for a long moment after she disappeared into the crowd, the rain blurring the street until everything looked distant and unreal. My son shifted in my arms, his forehead warm against my neck, trusting me completely, and that trust hurt more than the rejection I'd just faced. I lowered my head slightly, letting the rain mix with the tears I refused to wipe away. Around me cars passed, horns sounded. Life moved on without noticing that something inside me had just cracked open. I felt exposed. Like every weakness I'd spent years hiding had been dragged into the open. Across the street, a black car had been parked the entire time, its windows tinted dark enough that I hadn't noticed it before. Inside sat my CEO, a woman known in the office for her sharp gaze and even sharper decisions. She hadn't planned to watch my life unravel, but once she recognized me, she couldn't look away. She saw the way I followed my ex-wife outside without thinking, the way my shoulders slumped when she turned away from me, and the way I held my child as if letting go would mean losing everything. This wasn't the disciplined employee she knew from meetings and reports. This was a man stripped down to his rawest truth. From her seat, she remembered the small things she'd noticed before but never questioned. The way I was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. The times I declined after work gatherings with quiet excuses. The rare moments when I looked exhausted but still said, I'm fine. Watching me now, she understood what those moments had been hiding. This wasn't ambition, it was survival. She felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Empathy. When my ex-wife disappeared from view completely, the CEO opened her car door and stepped out into the rain. The sound of it closing made me look up, startled, my stomach dropping when I recognized her. Embarrassment rushed over me, hot and immediate. I straightened instinctively, as if I were back in the office, trying to regain some dignity. She walked toward me slowly, not with authority but with care. People like her didn't approach scenes like this without reason, and I braced myself for questions I didn't want to answer. She stopped a few steps away, studying my face, my soaked jacket, the child in my arms. Then, without saying a word, she handed me her umbrella. You don't need to explain, she said calmly, her voice steady but gentle. I stared at her, stunned, unsure if I'd heard correctly. I saw everything, she continued, and I've been seeing more than you realize for a long time. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. In that moment, standing in the rain, I realized someone had finally seen me. Not as an employee, not as a failure, but simply as a man doing his best to hold his world together. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The rain tapped softly against the umbrella as if giving me time to breathe, to collect the pieces of myself that had fallen apart minutes earlier. My son stirred again, his small hand gripping my collar, and the simple motion grounded me. The CEO crouched slightly so she was closer to his eye level, her expression changing in a way I'd never seen in the office. Warmer, almost human in a way titles usually erase. "He's a good sleeper," she said quietly, offering a small smile. I nodded, still unsure how this moment had become real. She straightened and looked back at me, her voice lowering. "You've been carrying more than anyone ever asked you to," she said. "And you never once used it as an excuse." The words hit me, harder than any criticism ever had. I opened my mouth to respond, to deny it, to brush it off the way I always did, but nothing came out. My throat tightened, and all I could manage was a shaky breath. She noticed and didn't push, giving silence the respect it deserved. Cars passed behind her, their headlights reflecting off the wet road, but the world around us felt strangely distant. "I don't step into my employees' personal lives," she continued, "but what I saw today wasn't weakness." She paused, choosing her words carefully. It was honesty and courage. I looked down at my son, then back at her, struggling to reconcile this compassion with the woman known for being unyielding. "You don't have to beg anyone to stay," she added softly. "The right people show up on their own." She took off her coat and draped it gently over my shoulders, despite my instinctive protest. "Tomorrow morning," she said, meeting my eyes, "come to my office before work starts." My heart skipped, uncertainty creeping in. She seemed to sense it and shook her head slightly. "Not for discipline." She took off her coat and draped it gently over my shoulders, despite my instinctive protest. "Tomorrow morning," she said, meeting my eyes, "come to my office before work starts." My heart skipped, uncertainty creeping in. She seemed to sense it and shook her head slightly. "Not for discipline. For conversation." A faint smile touched her lips. "There are things we can change, schedules, priorities, support." The weight on my chest eased just a little, replaced by something unfamiliar, hope. As she turned to leave, she stopped and glanced back once more. "You're not alone anymore," she said, her voice steady, almost certain. Then she walked away, her figure disappearing into the rain just like my ex-wife had. But this time, it felt different. I stood there holding my son, the umbrella steady above us, realizing that while one chapter had closed painfully, another had just begun. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something I might actually live.